there's two scenarios. If he's like, no, I need it to be, below $700. So basically, it's like going back in time and increasing the down payment on the original mortgage by $45,000. So you pay down the principal by $45,000. You request that they recast the mortgage, and so then they take that $45,000 off the principal. All other terms of the mortgage stay the same, and then they just recalculate what the monthly PI would be based on the reduced principal balance.
To me, it sounds like a very complicated deal structure.
It's basically the same thing. The only difference is, either he keeps 45 grand and his payments 50-ish, or he gives us that 45 grand and we pay it to the underlying mortgage and get the payments restructured so that it's roughly like $600.
So what's the official disposition on this? Are you assigning it, or?
We would basically be like mirror wrapping it.
So that's a Subto, right?
Yeah, it's a Subto acquisition, and a mirror wrap, for those who don't know, is literally like most wraps, you're going to increase the interest, right? So if you have a 2.5% interest, you might charge the buyer 6%, right? And now you're making that gap on the interest. A mirror wrap it's effectively like assigning it, right? Because you're keeping the original interest rate for the buyer. The biggest difference is you maintain a higher level control of the deal. When you assign a deal, you're virtually stepping out and you're basically washing your hands of the deal. So whatever happens between that end buyer and that original seller, if that buyer stops paying and destroys the house and everything, like, sorry about your bad luck, I'm out, But by wrapping it, you're staying in the middle. So you're kind of keeping a little bit more control. And if the guy ends up defaulting for whatever reason, then you can step back in, take over, and then redo it all over again.
What happens when they pass and you're just making payments to them?
So if you're making payments to them, if you have an obligation to them, it's pursuant to their estate. Like if they have a trust, and that trust dictates how everything gets, divvied up, and it's like, oh, it goes to my kids, then you're going to keep making payments to the estate via, their kids. If there's nothing set up and it has to go through probate, then the courts will figure it out, and determine what happens.
I'm just curious how you guys came up with the concept of recasting. I've never heard of that.
I didn't even know that was a thing until my underwriter was like, well, what we could do is this. Normally you wouldn't even think about it, unless the situation required it. So Subto 181 principal, arrears roughly about 26K, solar loan of like 30K, but that doesn't matter because it's $188 payment and that's assumable, so they're just going to assume that. So it's just like one thing to realize too, like when you get into some of this and like, somebody's like, oh, I've got a solar loan, like don't let that be the thing that gets in the way of you structuring the deal, right? Because oftentimes that can be assumed. So it'll just like muddy the waters when you start really thinking about it. It's like well, what are we going to do with that? It's just like they're just going to make the payments. Who cares? So don't let that throw you off. So I think when it's all said and done, it comes out to like a 206K is like the total amount, right? It's like 1490 is basically what the whole PITI is. Okay. We have it currently listed 250. Okay. So the offer that we got on the table is 215. So commissions would be roughly $8,600. Closing costs would be about we'll just call it 3,000, right? So right off the top, why does this offer not work, regardless of the terms? Total payoff is basically 206, right? So that gives us like $9,000. Basically, $9,000 is going to commissions, right? And then there's closing costs.
Right.
So we'd be negative.
215, yeah, and the remaining balance is 206, yeah. So you're gonna drown out in closing.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna be negative on this offer, right? But that aside, the terms that he presented were 50% down, 50% seller finance, interest only at 7%. Okay. So 215 times 0.5 is 107.5. So 107.5 in cash
Down payment.
and 107.5 seller finance, interest only for 30 years. Okay. So 107.5 times 0.07 is $7,525 of interest only payments every single year, divided by 12. So his monthly, effectively PI, but it's I because it's an interest only loan, is $627.08. Okay. And he's saying, well, I'm on Social Security, fixed income, like that's what I can afford. Now, the agent did make sure that he was aware, like, okay, so that's going to be your monthly payment for the house. You do understand you're going to have to pay taxes, insurance, and for the solar and electric and everything.
If you can only afford 627 or whatever that was.
So that's the issue. So he can afford that monthly payment. He can also afford the taxes, right? And he can afford the solar, right? So 627 plus 623 plus 188. So effectively, he's paying between $1,400 and $1,500 total. Let's say we were going to break even or even make money on this offer, right? Sure. Let's say it was something we could even consider. The problem is, if we do 107.5 and we have a principal balance of 181, that principal balance will be a little bit less once the arrears get caught up, right? Because some of those arrears are principal. So, let's say it brings it down, I don't know, let's see, 26,000. I think 8,000 of that is negative escrow balance. So it's roughly 18,000 in payments divided by 1490. So it's about 12 payments of principal. So what's 12 times 345? So it'll be about 4,000 lower. So basically, once the arrears are paid off, it'll basically be like a 177 payoff. Okay. So let's just say that's what the payoff ends up being, 177 principal payoff. Well, now we have a interest only loan of 107.5. So there's a handful of problems here. One is, well, if the underlying mortgage calls the note due tomorrow, he owes us 107. We owe the bank 177. So we have a $70,000 negative shortfall there.
Right.
Go be a monk that spends his life getting kicked in the nuts for fun. Like, that's basically what you're doing.
Right.
That's one problem. Now, you can mitigate that problem by saying, well, you can't mitigate the due on sale clause, right? Like, that's just like how much do you want to shoulder that risk? That's a big problem. But let's say he decides to pay this off at any point prior to an equilibrium, right? That's assuming we didn't put any of this money to pay down the mortgage balance, right? Like, obviously in that scenario, we'd have a bunch of cash. So
you would have to, wouldn't you?
We'd want to pay. Yeah. I mean, of that 107, 26 would definitely go to the arrears. So if we went 107.5 minus 26, so that'd be 81.
Solar too? Why wouldn't you want to pay off the solar?
Because that's assumable. So the buyer's just going to assume the payments and the responsibility. So I don't care about that, right? Okay. So after commissions, closing costs, and the arrears, we'll be left with $69,900. So even if we said, okay, you know what? Let's pay all $70,000 to that brings it now to where the underlying mortgage is the same as the interest-only loan. That might not be a terrible deal, but we're not making anything on the front end, right? And we're still actually in the hole a little bit, technically. If you look at this from a graph standpoint, right, this is the 107. That debt is going to stay 107 for 30 years, right? 30.
It's interest only.
The underlying mortgage, principal balance is going to reduce over time, right? So you could structure a clause in there that basically says, if the equilibrium is like 15 years, right? You could say, hey, prepayment penalties, if you pay it off prior to 15 years and based on what year you pay it off, here's the different penalties, right? So that's one thing you could do. But, it gets messy, right? Like now you've got all this like complex,
all these
a lot of complexities. Exactly, right? And on top of that, there's a world in which this could be viewed as a predatory loan because this guy's in his 70s, he's on a fixed income, you're doing an interest-only loan for 30 years, and he's going to be stuck with a $107,000 balance. You just took $100K from him. Like, do you want to get into elder abuse, all that? Like, no, right. It's not really worth it. But what's the motivation for this buyer?
If you have leads, but you're having trouble closing them, or if you have deals, but you're struggling to get them sold, we want a joint venture with investors just like you. And as your partner, we'll speak directly to get leads closed and contracts signed, no matter the deal type. Plus, we can help sell your wholesale deals and find the right buyer. If you're interested in partnering, go to closeanddispo.com, scroll to the bottom of that homepage to submit a deal, or just click the link in the description of this video, and together we'll make real estate investing easy. Let's get back to this video.
What's the problem that he's trying to solve? Because this will help, and the reason I want to go down this path is because I think, for you guys, when you're talking to sellers, right, there's a difference between uncovering the reason behind doing something and the motivation, right? So what is the motivation here for this buyer?
Is he on fixed income? Is that the deal?
Fixed income.
He can't qualify for a traditional?
Maybe he can't qualify for a traditional, but why would he even offer an interest only?
Doesn't have that much life left.
He doesn't want to keep the house, right? He doesn't care about actually.
Not necessarily. Interest only, your payments are always going to be lower than interest and principal.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that's going to allow his payment to be where he needs it to be for his fixed income. And he's also showing hey, I've got tons of skin in the game. I'm 50% in on this deal, right? So I'm a secured buyer, but I just need my payment to be this low, right? So how can we accomplish the same result, right? Which is getting him to the lower monthly payment, while still making this a deal that makes sense and actually make some profit? Because right now on the front end of this deal, we're losing money. The only way we make money is after about 12 or 13 years of getting interest only payments. He doesn't die and he doesn't, pay it off sooner, right? That's the only way this hits an equilibrium point where now we make money, right? So what we're going to do is...
Can I ask a quick question here? Is if he's got the gunpowder to put that much down, why is he so worried about the principal? Couldn't he, if the principal is only 344 and then the other part of it is the interest, right? I guess why is the 344 a month killing him? If he's got 50 grand to put down.
Because
even if he's on fixed income, I'm assuming that most of that 344, if he just has it in an interest account that gets 6-7%, would cover most of that a year.
Yeah, you're making a lot of assumptions about an average American who's in retirement age right now. The average American spends $120 for every $100 they make. The average American has less than $4,500 in savings. If we're speaking to what the average is, the average American is broke. This is why creative finance can be so difficult, because you have to think outside of the box, right? What most people are used to is talking to an agent, looking at a house, qualifying for a mortgage, putting 20% down or 5% down and making their monthly payments, and that's it, right? So all this extra things that can allow people that otherwise couldn't fit into that small box actually buy a property requires a lot of creativity. It took me being in Subto for probably 4 or 5 months before I really started getting extra creative. And that was like listening to all these different videos and like seeing all these different deal structures. And I'm like, all right, start thinking outside of the box, right? So you really have to get that creativity flowing a little bit. The thing is, people are so short-sighted, right? He's short-sighted in the fact that he's like, well, my fixed income, I can afford 627 plus the taxes and insurance and the solar, right? That's where his focus is, right? So we just have to readjust the focus. And that's oftentimes when you're structuring a deal creatively, it's all about readjusting the focus, right? It's about zooming out, looking at the big picture, not just looking at one component of the picture, because it's like, if I'm zoomed in on the hood ornament of a Ferrari, right? Like I'm thinking, oh, $300,000 car, like luxury, lifestyle, all this stuff, right? But if we zoom out and we see that it's a Fiero that was body kitted to look like a Ferrari, now it's like, okay, that's a $12,000 car with a body kit on it, right? Like totally different ball game, right? Like very different conversation. So it's all about just repositioning their focus, right? So what we're going to do here in this conversation with this seller or this buyer is just reposition and say, hey, look, just to confirm, Mr. Buyer, like your priority is getting a payment that fits in your budget. Am I wrong about that? No, you're not wrong about that. Okay. And your budget is somewhere around that $650 to $700 range. Could you afford $870? Like if that was what the number had to be monthly, could you afford $870 plus taxes and insurance and the solar? If the answer is yes, okay, now I have two options. If the answer is no, I might only have one option, but I think I have two options regardless, right? And then I'll double down. I'll say, okay, got it. So just so we're clear, right? Like the purchase price of the property doesn't necessarily matter to you. It matters the terms that are going to dictate the monthly payment for you pursuant to the amount of money that you have down. Well, yeah, but I don't want to overpay. Like, yeah, I got it. But like if I said, hey, I'm going to sell you a $100,000 house for $1 million, you'd probably tell me no. But if I told you, hey, I'd sell you this $100,000 house for $1 million, just give me a dollar a month for 1 million months, would you buy that? Everybody in their right mind would say, absolutely. Why would I not? That would be retarded not to take that deal, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to him and say, hey, we're listed at $250. If he can afford $868, then what we say is okay, just for number's sake, I'm just going to go at $250. So we're going to go at the list price, right? So you're going to bring $107,000 to the table. So two options, right? If he says, no, I need to be at the six and a quarter monthly payment. Okay, well, you said you're going to come with $107,000 down, right? Perfect. Okay. So of that 107, 10 is going to go to the agents for commissions, right? 3K is going to go to closing costs. 26K is going to go to the arrears of the underlying mortgage, right? 39, right? So that's 39, 107 minus 39. So that leaves us with 68. And then we're going to do roughly about 45 to principal pay down. So now what happens? So we already put the 26K to arrears, which brought the principal down to 177. We're going to further pay down that principal balance, $45,000, which is going to leave the underlying mortgage balance at roughly 132. Again, it's at a 3.5%. And then we have the mortgage company recast the mortgage payments pursuant to the new principal balance, which will reduce the principal and interest payment from 868 to roughly around 650 to 700. So now it achieves the goal that he had, which is I got 107K to put down. I need my payment to be somewhere between 650 and 700, right? But what does it do on top of that, right? Like there's added value in this structure over what he offered, because even though he might say, well, but I'm paying $35,000 more for the property. I could see why you might think that, Mr. Jones. Here's the reality. In this scenario, every single month, $300 is going towards principal paydown. So you're actually reducing the principal balance. Even though it's 132 now as opposed to 107, at some point, probably in 5 years, 10 years, that principal payoff will be lower than 107. Whereas in your scenario, in 30 years, your principal balance will still be 107. So if we calculate the payments over time on this, right, 627.08 times 360 months of payments, the interest only payments is $225. Let me move this. 225,748 plus the principal payoff of 107.5, which puts him at 333,248 plus the cash that he put down of 107.5. So he now paid $440,000 for this property, right? In his offer. Whereas in our offer, over the time, let's just say it's a $675 monthly payment for principal and interest times, we'll say it's 360 months. They're 4 years roughly into their mortgage, so it's going to be less than that. So we'll call it 26 years. So 26 years times 12 times 675. So the principal interest payments in this deal structure would be $210,600 plus the 107.5 that he put down. So now he paid $318,100 for this property versus $440,000. So he saved $121,000 to $122,000 over the life of that loan.
So that first option that you just laid out, what is that? Him coming in at the asking price?
Yeah, this is him coming at the asking price of $250,000, bringing the $107,000 that he wanted to bring to the table to put down, us recasting the mortgage, and that leaves us making $23,000.
It's a novation?
It's like a wrap novation. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's 23 grand profit. That's after paying out agents. That's after all expenses, right?
Okay.
So that's option one. That's him saying, okay, I can only afford this. Now, even though he's saying he can only afford $627,000, if he had to bring $107,000 to the table, that might be true. However, if he only had to bring $62,000 to the table, that's not necessarily true. So follow me on this structure. Same asking price, $250,000, right? Instead of bringing 107, we get him to bring 62 to the table. Of that 62, 10K is in commissions, 3K is in closing costs, 26K in arrears, right? So 26, 36, that's 39. So 62 minus 39, that actually leaves us 23K of profit, right? We just basically mirror wrap him the terms, which would put his PI at 868. Now he's like, well, guys, I told you I can't afford more than 6.25, right? So what's the difference? 627 minus 868. It's $241 gap. Where's that $241 come from? So if instead of coming to the table with 107, he came to the table with 62, what does he have in his bank account in this scenario that he didn't have in this scenario?
What are the differences?
$45,000. Okay. So he's got $45,000 now sitting in a savings account. Even if he just shoved that in a mattress, right? He still has $45,000, right?
Yeah.
And the difference is 241. So if we take $45,000 divided by $241, that's 186.72 monthly payments divided by 12. That's 15.56 years worth of the $241 shortfall that he's saying he doesn't have. So this structure will allow him to make $868 a month payments for the next 15 and a half years. So then the question is, okay, well, what do I do in 15 years when I can't afford more than 627? Well, at that point, like, you'll have so much principal pay down. So now it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, well, what do I do in 15 years? Well, in 15 years, your principal pay down, you've already paid down half of it, right? And then whatever that principal amount, I mean, obviously this is going to go up, but even if it was just $344 a month over 15 years times 12 times 15, you'll have at least another $62,000 in principal pay down. So now you've basically paid down, between your down payment and your monthly principal, roughly $170,000 of equity in your property. Again, he's in his 70s, so by then he's going to be in his mid to late 80s, possibly 90s. At that point, if he's like, I don't really care what happens, you do a reverse mortgage on the property and start getting income from the property at that point.
Yeah. They all do. So on his first offer, the 215, so he's paying on top of the PI, he's paying the 7% interest?
No. What? So he doesn't know that this is a Subto deal. Okay. So he's just making an offer of like, hey, you guys have it listed for $250. I'll pay you $215. I'll do 50% down, and I'll do 50% seller finance interest only. Now, if we own this property outright, that's a screaming deal. I would take that deal and run for the hills, because again, yeah, I'm selling it for $215, but over the life of the term, I'm making $440,000 on that property, right?
Right.
If my principal and interest payment was less than 627, I'm not even negotiating with this guy. I'm like, done, take it. Even if we're breaking even.
Yeah.
Because over the term, I'm gonna make way more money.
Yeah.
Right. But because of the structure of the Subto deal and like the complexity of it,
so how was he? Since this is a Subto deal, how is he bringing down the mortgage? How's he paying down the mortgage?
So he's not. Again, he doesn't know that there's a mortgage balance, right? Like, as far as he's concerned, we own the property, right? But we're just going to wrap it. So what we're doing is we're taking the down payment and we're saying, okay, well, we got 26 in arrears. We'll take that out of the down payment. Okay. And then if we wanted to recast the mortgage payment, then we would take $45K and apply it to the principal pay down so that the payments come out to where he needs the payments.
I get you now. You're getting to his monthly max, one way or another, with his down payment.
Yep.
I got you.
Exactly.
I got you. Yep. Makes sense.
It just takes it's a little complex to like come up with how you're going to structure it, but like, but once you know, once you know what you can do, and you have like, it's harder to do this when you're trying to give them like terms. And this is why, like, when you're selling a deal on terms, like you're wrapping or lease option, it's really important not to restrict yourself and start saying, hey, we're looking for 10% down and $250 a month. You know what I mean? Like, because once you start doing that, you now box yourself in. You just get them to come up with an offer. You know, what can you afford? What kind of down payment can you afford? Okay, what's the most important to you? And then it's like, all right, well, now we just pull a bunch of levers.
Yep.
Right. And in this, I've got down payment lever. I've got purchase price lever. I've got, paying down the underlying principal lever. I could even if I wanted to, I could even structure something where I put like a second position seller finance note. Like I could do other things with this. Like if I wanted to, not make the 23 grand and I wanted to make more money over time, I could basically say, okay, well, we'll lower your down payment by 23 grand. We'll just put a $23,000 second position on top of this at 7%, and that'll be, 15-year note,
Yep.
right? So like there's all types of different things that I could do, but really it's
going back to I know my first question earlier in the conversation about the lease option. Since I know you guys want to, this looks like because it's listed on the market and it's like more like a novation type with a different type of strategy on the financing part. The lease option would not work on this, right? You guys didn't explore that?
The lease option would be difficult because I got 26K in arrears.
Wouldn't it be marketed a certain way compared to what you guys have it on the market for? So
not necessarily. I mean, you can market it. I mean, you could market it differently, but you could still put it on, list it and say, hey, rent to own, seller financing options available, lease options available, right? And then just leave it open to discussion, and you just have your purchase price. But as far as like the terms are concerned, right? Like because I have 26K in arrears. Now, what I won't have is 3K in closing costs, right? So let's say I marketed this out myself and I didn't have an agent and I got rid of that $10,000 in agent commissions. Like, okay, now I got $29,000 to bring to the table. Well, $29,000 on a 250 purchase price is 11, almost 12%. Sure. Could I get that? Yeah, I possibly could get that. But, that's a stretch. I mean, that deal where we got a $30,000 option fee, that's like a rare option fee.
I got you.
Right? Like, I mean, Andrew, all the people that are applying for your lease options, like what's the highest like option fee anybody's even like remotely said they could put down?
30.
30?
So that's the highest.
The highest.
Yeah.
What that's probably has to do with the market that you're in or the price point that you're in?
So the ones I've gotten that are 30 and 20, those home prices were 200 and 300, and each of those people had to sell their current property in order to pay it. Actually, you know what? I got one for 40, but it's 40 over 9 months.
40 over 9 months. Okay.
So they put 15 down and then they have 5K a month, like for X number of months.
For 9 months. That's cool.
Down.
So it's and especially because we've listed this for a little while, it's been on the market for 60 plus days, right? Like we're not getting a lot of action. It's like, okay, how can we make this work? Because we still have an expiration on our contract with the seller, right? They're in arrears. We I don't know if we pushed off a foreclosure or what. It might have got pushed off. I forget. At some point, we're going to be up against an auction date. So how much do we want to really jump through a bunch of hoops? But I also have $23,000 of flexibility here too, right? Like if this guy says no to this structure, first off, I'm gonna be like, why?
Yeah.
Like justify to me why you're saying no to me, because like in my mind, your offer is wildly idiotic. And you're like, okay, maybe it's just your position in life and like what you need. Like it's the only thing that you think makes sense. But let me help you understand why this is a way better deal for you, right? But if I had to reduce to, if he's stuck on like, well, I feel like I'm wildly overpaying for the property. Like, I mean, technically you're $122,000 wildly overpaying for the property over here.
He's probably seeing it because what his lifespan is. He's not going to technically overpay for it. He's more of a live now, pay now kind of person probably because of where he's at. Exactly. So, but I don't know. That's itch for him. I mean, what is he giving? What is he putting down? Is he putting down the same on the option one over here for
this one?
260.
Yeah, on this one, the 250, he's still putting 100. Yeah, 250. Okay. If he can, if we need to recast it, he's putting 107 down.
Yeah, so it's the same. He's just recasting the payment. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, monthly payment's the same. money up front is the same. The only difference is the purchase price is higher, but his interest is half of what his interest is up here.